Hello, and welcome to the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We will, as always, start with a story.
I think back to my childhood and I feel lucky with the experiences I had. Brought up in a cafe and homemade bakery from the age of 7, there was never a dull moment. The business was in the centre of a little village, and looking back, I can see Mum and Dad built up a community of support and encouragement for the youth and the elderly. I worked at the front of the house, serving and dealing with customers from a very early age. This was alongside my dad. Mum and Dad would always employ teenagers. As I said, they were willing to learn and adapt. Mum's one experience with an elder lady put her off for life, as the woman would not budge on anything. It was her way or no way. I learned so much from my parents and the way they involved their employees in the business. There was lots of fun and laughter and sometimes tears. Come January, we'd have a games night and a meal to recognise the hard work of all the staff. Other times, cakes were made for birthdays. And when on duty, the girls and boys would always get a hot meal and a break. I can recall Mum's laughter and her ability she had to get the girls and boys to work extremely hard. Many would come in for an extra mile at Christmas and other occasions in the early hours to assist with the baking. Again, this was full of laughter. Friendships were formed that have lasted over the decades and are still as part of my Facebook friends as well. I remember being extremely busy on one particular day, and Mum was in the kitchen under immense pressure. We had a little hatch where she would check what was happening with the kitchen, share orders and get the meals through. On this particular day, my dad was barking his orders through the hatch. Now, bear in mind, he'd been in the RAF and he had led giving out orders on parade. So it was a bark. Mum was getting to the end of her tether and wasn't keeping up. Eventually, she lost her rag, throwing the food at the hatch. Next time Dad stuck his head through, luckily it missed and went down the wall. Of course, that meant she had to clear it up. So there's a moral there. One of Dad's favourite saying was that the customer wasn't always right. And I think he had a point, actually. If customers were rude or obnoxious, then it simply wasn't tolerated. It was great because I learned from an early age to put my foot down with behaviour that was bad. Even on one occasion, throwing out a group of big fellas, and they were big, who had roared up on their big motorbikes and had been extremely rude to some of the customers and staff. I was only 16 at the time, but it gave me the skills that have played into my working life. If something's out of order, I will say and look to find ways to move things forward. At 17, my dad ended up in hospital for a major operation, and we knew it would be for a minimum of 2 weeks. I was in the middle of my A-levels. So it meant I ended up covering the front of the house and doing the jobs that Dad would do, including going to the cash and carry and other roles. This meant I wasn't getting much of my schoolwork done. But to me, that didn't matter. What actually mattered was loyalty to my parents' business and making sure it didn't falter. Several times a week, I would drive Mum the 40 miles to the hospital, where we would be met with a grumpy man who was in pain and who didn't want to be in hospital. It was always a traumatic drive to the busy outskirts of the town, especially as I'd only just passed my driving test. Pretty traumatic, really traumatic, in fact. On one occasion, my car decided to break down, and with dusk approaching, the headlights went and then it started spluttering. Can you imagine the feelings I had, especially as I was new to driving? My heart sank, especially as we didn't have any breakdown cover. Luckily, my dear school friend and her family came to our rescue. So, Christine Connors, if you are listening, then I have never forgotten this. Absolutely saved my life that day. The business always had quiet times in January and February, and in those months we would live by the skin of our teeth. Luckily, the one thing in plentiful supply was food and Mum's delicious home baking. Interestingly, having been brought up in the war years, she knew how to eke out food in those months. Sundays and Mondays were the day we'd close in that period, as trade would be extremely slack. I used to love those days of closing, as we would play board games, sometimes by candlelight when the miners' strike was happening. Other times we'd travel to London and go to radio shows. Shows like New Seekers, Nana Muscuri and others. All fun and great to be part of. I can still hear the roaring and them telling us to clap when the people came on. One of the things I remember as well in that period is Dad poring over the books and looking at trends, something that came useful for me later in my operational lead days. I remember little things like he's making sure he recorded in his diary key points about the business. This sticks in my mind because when the taxman came calling, he never had any issues because of his spot-on recording in the business. These were great times, and they influenced my childhood, and also it helped me with the skills in the workplace. So on that note, I just want to end with a few lines after a song sung by Mary Hopkins in 1969. Those were the days, my friend. We thought they would never end. Oh, my friend, we're older but no wiser, for in our hearts the dreams are still the same. And my final thought to leave you with is, do our dreams stay the same?
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful story. Do our dreams stay the same? Thank you, Nicola. Before we explore that story a little more, for anybody who is listening for the first time or anybody who may have forgotten, my name is Stefano. I run Puck Creations and I am the regular host of this podcast. If the title, Storytelling with Puck, hasn't given it away, this podcast is all about stories. We will share stories like the one you've just heard. We will chat about those stories and we'll also see how stories fit into the business world. Of course, we couldn't do any of that without our wonderful guests. So let's start by properly introducing Nicola Richardson. Nicola, please lead us into a conversation about who you are.
Okay, so thank you, Stefan, for the invite. I really appreciate it, and thank you for letting me share my story. I am a leadership and management mentor, and also I go in and build teams where there are issues. So I have a team turnaround service that I do, which I absolutely love, because you go in and you review over a couple of days what's really going on. And it's amazing how people open up to strangers at times, which I find fascinating. And I think it is about being friendly and approachable. And I actually think there's also a key thing in about sharing stories as well in those circumstances, because that brings people closer. It's a bit like that storytelling round fires, isn't it?
Yeah, that feeling of warmth and connection that you can't really get anywhere else. So tell me a bit more about that. How do you encourage people to share stories when you go in and you're speaking to them in the workplace?
So often I will share my own stories first of things where things have gone wrong, because there's nothing wrong with being vulnerable and sharing those stories. And the times where you've also shown emotion, where people will often say you shouldn't show the emotion. So one story I have is we were doing some collecting of data and people weren't doing the data collecting. They weren't filling in the spreadsheets, they weren't recording. It was on a helpline. We needed to know what type of inquiries we were getting so that we could do changes to make it better for the customer. But the staff just weren't doing it because they weren't bought into it. So I had to go round to each team and talk to them about it. And on the first team, I got a load of flack thrown at me. It was awful, and I was feeling quite got at, to be quite honest, a bit like a pack of wolves at you. But I had the conversation, I stood my ground and I walked away, and then I went to the next team. And I was really frustrated because I knew how important it was and how it would actually help them. So I explained all this. But as I'm explaining it, tears are in my eyes. And they were all really anti, but they could see the tears in my eyes. And by the time I walked away, they said to their manager, "Nicola's really upset, isn't she? We're going to do it."
Wow.
And it wasn't intentional, but just showing that vulnerability made them realise how serious I was about it.
It's there's something, I think, to motivation. So why do people do what they do? What encourages them to work for someone or for something, or more importantly, for themselves to get to a certain place? And I imagine that by seeing you become so upset, that became a motivation for them because they realised the importance and how much you cared about it.
Yeah.
And, that's one method, but as you say, it wasn't on purpose.
Yeah.
And it's,
I think if you ever do it contrived, they will see straight through it.
Exactly. There are, I'm not going to mention politicians' names because I might get sued, but there is a politician who was known recently for crying supposedly on TV, but not really crying. By
Yeah.
everyone kind of went, I'm not sure that's real. But yeah, you're right. When it is real, people can usually tell. People can see that there's something there. But as you say, it's not really just about crying. And when you talk about being vulnerable as well, it's not about, letting everything out and you have to be Mr. or Miss Emotional. But what is important is that people understand how much you care about what you're doing and why it's so important. But then also, they need to realise why it's important to them. And often that combination of realising that you are the person who wants this to be done, and this is your reason why, and this is your motivation for it. And then them realising that your motivation for getting it done is also about how their lives can improve because you really care about that. Then suddenly you start to get a bit of a connection. And I think that stories are part of the way that we can help to explain that, because sometimes you can say it almost as I just did then, in a matter of a fact way, and it doesn't really cut through. But if you share a story, like you did when you shared this story of you getting emotional, I imagine that everyone else can go, oh, okay, so she's sharing the story to show that she was emotional at this point. She's not really emotional now, but at the same time, the connection is still strong because you shared the story. Would that does it work? So when you share that kind of story,
yes,
do you
it
start
does.
to get people on board?
Yeah, and I think as well, it makes people realise that they can show their true selves at work, and let's be clear about that, because I do DISC assessments as well. And
for our listeners who don't know, what is a DISC assessment?
So it's a type of behavioural, how you react under certain conditions. Some people like to call it a personality assessment, but it's not really. It's looking at your behaviours and how it affects you. So what I love about the assessment is it tells you how you react under stress, which quite a lot of people actually are not aware of how they do react under extreme stress, and it actually makes them realise by the descriptions, and they can actually go, yeah, actually I've seen that. and then that creates a great opportunity to have a conversation around it. And often, and I've lost my thread, as you can tell, often you find by having that DISC assessment conversation around what they're reading, that I often bring in little stories there around, well, I've had a situation like this, and this is what happened, and this is how I felt, and my gosh, so don't get hung up on that. This is about moving you forward.
So if you were to, instead of using stories, if you were to just use kind of facts and figures and say this, almost give them a textbook of this is how you behave and these are the traits that you have, etc. How do you think that would come across? How do you think
people would switch off? People don't buy into that. People buy into emotions and feelings and understanding what's in it for them. And you've got to paint that picture. And the only way you can paint that picture is by storytelling. And one of the key things I learned when leading change projects was that the storytelling was really vital to paint that picture of where you were going and why it was going to be good. And don't be under any illusion, though. It's going to be a bit hard getting there, and let's work out how we're going to manage that.
That makes a lot of sense. And so tell me more then about what you do when you're talking to leaders and when you're working in change management. So you are assessing things with DISC and so behaviours. What else are you doing when you're going into your clients? How are you helping them?
So I look at the interactions that are going on with team members. I talk to team members to find out what they're struggling with. And often it's as simple as problems aren't dealt with. They're left to fester. And we all know how frustrated we can feel when they're left to fester. And 9 times out of 10, that's often the case. They don't feel listened to as a result of the problems being left to fester. So it's about working out how you can help those people move forward so that they're heard, their voices are heard, and get them to do things around those problems. One of my biggest beefs, though, is because I've been taught problem solving correctly, is that people don't do problem solving correctly. And often they'll do a fix that doesn't actually get rid of that problem, and it'll rear its head again. And I've seen it time and time again. And
so why does that happen? What makes people not solve the problem correctly?
Because they don't dig deep. They don't go to the actual root cause. So the right in depth, what's really underneath it all. And so that's really about using the right questioning techniques and about being persistent like a dog with a bone, to be honest. It's like, why? Just keep going till you get through to the bottom of what's really going on. And if you're not sure, get your evidence as well, because you always need evidence, but you also need feelings. You also need to keep burrowing. And it's just a combination of those things. And there's some lovely structured ways of doing that.
So I imagine, I'm going to come back and ask you about those structured ways, but I'm imagining, as you were describing that, I'm imagining me going into a doctor and saying, doctor, I've got a problem. I've got a cut that's just appeared on my hand. It's come from nowhere. I didn't cut it on anything. It's just appeared. And they say, oh, okay, here's some cream. And they give you some cream for that cut. And then you go back a week later and you say, doctor, I've got a cut that's just appeared from nowhere on my other hand, and they give you some cream for that cut again. Maybe I shouldn't have used the example of doctors because I'm not medically trained in any way, shape or form. But then when you eventually go back, I don't know, the 6th time, and you have 6 different cuts that have just appeared from nowhere, you find out that you've got some kind of blood condition or something else that's actually wrong with you.
Skin condition, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But all they've done is given you some cream to cover up those initial cuts. And you're getting worse and worse and worse, and the initial problem has never been solved because you're just covering up the symptoms. Like that's what I was imagining when you were explaining what's happening with businesses.
And interestingly, I had that experience at the doctors, that they were compartmentalising all the different symptoms I was having instead of looking at it holistically.
Yeah.
So really it is about looking at your problem holistically and really working out what's going on.
Okay. And so you mentioned that there are some specific techniques for that. Can you, I don't want you to explain them in loads of detail because you'll probably be giving away your job. And also, I don't know, it could probably take quite a long time for people to understand it. But can you give us some ideas of what they are?
Yeah, one of my simple ones is the 3 C's it's called. And you use it so that it's a prompt and you have it as a sheet, have it visible where everybody can fill it in, and you put down what the cause is, what's going on, but it's always got to relate back to the business. What is it affecting in the business? And you need to capture that as well. So you have your cause, and then you have your concern. Let me get the wording right. That's the concern. And then your cause is where you have a discussion as a team of what is the cause. So that's when you might use your questioning techniques like Rudyard Kipling's 5 Men, why, what, when, how, and I can never remember the fifth, and also the 5 whys. So you use types of questioning to drill down. And when you're doing that questioning, you're probably going to establish that you may need to go and collect some evidence. And that's okay, that's great, but just make sure that action happens. So then you've got, what is the cause is starting to come out. And then you have your countermeasure, what you're going to put in place, the 3 C's. And there's some great little YouTube videos about them, if anybody wants to Google it. And it's really good. And you have actions on the side and you just follow through. Because the key thing that goes wrong with most people is they don't follow through on the actions, which is something I'm really hot on. And I'm a bit of a nag as well, to be honest, but hey.
So that's actually something which I was about to ask about. You say you're a bit of a nag. And my question was going to be, this process, I imagine, isn't short. You're trying to implement change.
Some can be. Some. Okay. Some can be quick wins, and then others you need to take away. You might have to have a team meeting for an hour to work it out, but no more than an hour at any time because people soon switch off. So you would do a deep dive. Let's do a deep dive and find out what's really going on here, and then we've got some actions, and you'd have an action log come out of it, and then you always need somebody to keep these people accountable.
So that was what I was going to ask. So you're keeping them accountable, and how do you also motivate them? Because sometimes when you're doing tasks, it can feel like you're implementing lots of change, but nothing's happening at first because. Yes, some of the sessions might be short, but it always takes time to implement something within a business and to get it to go throughout a whole business. So how do you keep people motivated so that they know that actually, yes, it's not quite there yet, but we're going in the right direction? What do you do for that?
So I would have milestones, so key milestones, and you would celebrate when you hit a milestone because if we're really honest, we've already seen stats that say something like 71% of change fails. And that's because people aren't agile about it. So you go in and you start something and you realise it's not going where you need it to go, or something's come left field and you're really struggling to think how that's going to fit in with what you're doing. You have to stop. You involve the people that are going to be doing that work or are involved in the whole thing. And the project team, and you talk about it and you include their thoughts in how you're going to divert and take a bit of a curved, bendy road to get to where you need to be. And at the end of the day, you might sometimes need to actually go back and look at your vision. And is that the right vision? Do I need to change it? Is this really going to work? That happens sometimes. But the point is you involve the people that it's going to affect, and you keep painting that vision of where you're going to end up, but you accept that there are going to be hurdles at times. And then you also accept that you're going to celebrate when you hit a key milestone, because, it's a great achievement that you've got that far.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. I think it's something that all of us in business probably need to take heed of, because we often almost kill ourselves for the things that we've done wrong. And of course, we all do things wrong. We all make mistakes. But when we do something well, we rarely celebrate. I know I'm guilty of this. I am forced to celebrate when we do things well by my partner. Luckily, she's very good at at encouraging me to say, hang on, well done, this was brilliant. You need to just, I don't know, have a celebratory meal or whatever it is to say well done. But I know that I'm always thinking about, well, what's next? Okay, yeah, that's good, but what do I do now to improve the business even more and to do something extra? So part of what you're doing to encourage people to keep going is to say, hang on a minute, let's think about what you've done well, and that helps with motivation.
It does, definitely does. And the other thing to do is when something goes wrong, get together and dig deep to find out why it went wrong, and actually what bits can we still use, what bits do we need to change, and then marry that together to bring it back into the project, because or in the team or wherever it is, because we all have things that go wrong sometimes, but let's celebrate when it goes wrong, because we've actually learned something along the way as well.
So when it gets to that stage, I imagine that that's a good point for introducing stories again. So do you have any stories? I haven't given you any time to prepare for this, apologies, but do you have any stories of something that went wrong?
Yeah, actually I do.
Perfect. And we'll discover more about that in a second. But before we do, let's celebrate a little win. You're currently listening to episode 19 of the Storytelling with Puck podcast, and we're privileged to have our final guest for Series 1, the incredible Nicola Richardson. We've talked about her childhood growing up in a cafe, her work using stories to turn teams around, and her focus on milestones to keep her teams motivated. Your next 25 minutes will be full of stories as we discuss sharing things that went wrong, accidental managers, and making sure the quieter people in meetings are always heard. Don't forget, there'll be a Puck creation story at the end of this episode. But for now, let's find out. Nicola, what went wrong?
So I was working on a big project, and we were due to deliver, and it was the 31st of October, and it was really big, really complex, and about a week and a half before we were due to deliver, I discovered that the other team that was supposed to be looking after the training and development for the teams that were going to be doing the work hadn't actually done anything. Major headache, because we were supposed to go live and we'd only got something like 10 days. So I immediately went in and took over the meetings, because at the end of the day, the project was mine to control, and I was one that was having to report with it. So we sat in there, and bless my team, I threw two of them to the lions, and I said, look, you know this subject inside out, so can't you pull a training product together and let's get it out there, and even if we don't do it on the day it goes live, the day after, because we know we're only going to get a small amount of this working to start with. And one of them leapt at the chance and really went the extra mile, and she did a fantastic job. But the best bit about it was, or not best bit was, I actually had to go into a really senior person who had heard that we'd got these problems, and he wanted a justification of what was going on and wanted to know what we were going to do about it. And there were some senior members who were kind of going around the houses, not answering his points properly. And I was like, well, actually, this is what I've arranged, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it. I'm following it up daily, and although we won't deliver on the day, the actual training will deliver it the day after, but the applications can still come in. And he said, that's all I wanted to hear. I just wanted to know what you were doing about it, and know that we had a plan. And sometimes I think people get hooked on trying to justify and flannel their way out of a situation, when doesn't it help just have a plan, have the actions happening, and share that bit?
See, that's brilliant. And I imagine when you tell that story to a newer clients then, and when there is a situation where something might be going a little bit wrong, or even if you're preempting the possibility of things going wrong and you're explaining this story to them, that's also then a lesson for them, without actually saying, because you could quite easily just say, hey, look, if something's going wrong, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to tell you what it is. And if something goes wrong on your side, I want you to be honest with me and tell me what it is. You could just say that. However, sometimes just saying that, people don't really believe you, because it's not enough. They think, well, you say that, but I've heard that a billion times before. But I imagine that explaining the story you just explained then is going to make people realize that, A, you're not perfect, so potentially things might go wrong, but B, when they do, they know they can rely on you to come up with a solution, and C, they can also rely on you to tell them what went wrong, be honest about it, and to explain to them how you're going to fix it together. And I think, again, you could say those things, but explaining it the way you just have, personally, I would have a lot more confidence in you because of the story. Do you find that happens with your customers?
It does. Yes, I think it does. I mean, I have to be a little bit careful about the stories I share at times, which is one of my headaches sometimes, because I think I've got so many stories in there, and they all help you understand. One, as you say, how I work, and two, about how open and honest I am, because that's certainly a theme that runs through. And I think when I left my last role, I was actually told how open and honest I was.
Was that in the celebratory manual?
I think sometimes people don't see it as being a good thing, but actually you need to know where you stand.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, there's a certain amount of tact in life. And there are times where maybe being 100% open and honest, save it for a little bit later if somebody's kind of bawling and crying.
And who you're with.
You're with.
You've got to judge the situation, definitely. But when you're in a situation where it's all hinging, you don't want flannel. You need to know the truth at that point. And I think this is one of the issues around business continuity as well. People try and hide things. Well, actually, just get on with it, sort it, and share. At least you've got a plan.
That makes a lot of sense. So, with what we were just talking about there, I've known you for a while now through our connection on LinkedIn, and something which often comes across within your messaging. Talk to me about empathy and compassion and what those words mean to you.
I think it's about understanding people, or trying to understand people, but we never know somebody inside out, and everybody's got hidden bits. We've even got hidden bits to ourselves. So it's about at least giving that opportunity for them to open up, not being judgmental. It's so easy to get into that judgmental thing. And another thing, and I'm not perfect at this, I have to admit, but don't make assumptions, because often there's things going on in people's lives that they don't want to talk about, but they actually need a kind of bit of empathy, a bit of tolerance. I often think tolerance is another word that we should use more of. If it's a blip, accept it's a blip, but just be there supporting them and signposting and offering them the support that they need. I think that's one of the things that about management, people think they need to have the answers. You don't need to have the answers. You just need to be able to signpost people to the right place, so that if they want that support, they go and take it.
I like that. I really like signposting people to the right place. I think that's a perfect example of what a manager should be doing, because I don't like the word should, but what a good manager will do, because what often happens, and again, you talk about this a lot, is you have accidental managers, people who get brought into a position because they were maybe, let's say, an engineer. They were a really, really great engineer. And because they're a really, really great engineer, they need to get promoted, because otherwise they might leave and go somewhere else. But the only step up for them isn't to another engineering role, it's into management. And so they then get told that now you're going to manage 10 people. And so they get to that stage and go, well, this is great. I'm going to manage them a little bit like a CAD system. And so they're suddenly like, right, okay, how would I design these people? And they start thinking about the perfect automated design, or computer assisted design. And so suddenly they have this completely new challenge which they don't know how to deal with, and then suddenly people are coming to them with problems, and they're not just managing other engineers. And even if they are, they try and say, well, okay, this is exactly how you fix it. But as you say, sometimes they're not there to give answers all the time. They're just there to show people how to do their job better and how they can go and search for those answers. So what you talk about, like I say, accidental managers quite a lot. How do you support them? How do you kind of change their mindsets and get them to thinking in a different way?
So I think that's really about leadership and management mentoring. I think middle managers actually work best if they are supported by a one-to-one. And certainly from my operational lead days, I would have regular meetings with my managers, and we would discuss situations, and I would bring out experiences I'd had, and then we'd discuss whether that was the best solution or whether there was another way. And it was that kind of meeting of two minds and sharing thoughts and ideas that actually helped them move forward and build their confidence. And I suppose one story I had is a lovely lady, but absolutely her management was in shambles. Her team didn't have confidence in her. She was very introverted and struggled with that outward type of management. And so I used to meet her weekly, and also she struggled with getting actions done because of asking the team. So I would meet with her weekly, and we would have an action plan, and we would discuss that action plan and where she needed to change and how she was feeling, what was going well, what wasn't going so well. And she would always be honest about what wasn't going so well. And then we'd talk about, perhaps there's another way of doing this, and have you thought about this? And again, the stories would come out. And over time, she became much more confident and willing to do things and sort things. In fact, when I left, she was organising events and arranging training, and it was just fantastic to see that shift in her because she believed in herself.
That's great. It's brilliant work, and it's interesting because there's such a fine balance, because you have people who get into management roles and they need that boost, they need that confidence boost in the way that you just showed, and there's also people who get into management roles who are way too confident, but they're not actually very good at what they're doing. And I imagine that finding that balance, this probably comes back to a lot of what you were talking about earlier, when it's about asking the right questions to dig in and to truly understand what the problem is. Because sometimes the problem is lack of confidence, sometimes it's too much confidence, and sometimes it's a completely different issue altogether, I imagine. And so it's
definitely. I've had occasions where I've had managers who had too much confidence almost. Mm-hmm. And that's something I will tend to try and say something in a very nice way, but I will try to make them aware when I think it's affecting people around me, not particularly because of me, but because of how it's making everybody else feel. And if I'm getting those vibes and those conversations that are coming to me, then I will think about how can I say it. And sometimes, again, it will be a story around, I've had this happen once and this is how I felt, and in the end this is what happened, and actually I got it wrong or I got it right, but hey, and that really helps them. Sometimes you can see them stop and pause, and they
realise that you're talking about somebody else, but you're also kind of talking about them, and that clicks. And that makes sense. It can be, I think that can almost be harder sometimes than starting with somebody who has no confidence, because you don't want to drain people of their confidence either. But at the same time, if that confidence, as you say, is affecting other people, and again, you talked earlier about being honest, and this is where honesty and tact kind of mix very well. You have to be honest, but at the same time, they need to understand the message, and this is where empathy and compassion come in, and understanding that they might be going through things themselves.
It does. And interestingly, confidence, you see, because I can remember being told by two managers that I need to decker down my passion, because it could overpower people at times, because I was always about improving things and changing things and making things better for not only the customer, but also for the staff. And sometimes when I was really passionate, I probably could be overpowering. And I did need a manager to tell me that. And when you get several, you realise there must be an element of truth. And that's, again, can be misconstrued as confidence.
Yeah, that's true. Oftentimes, actually, I think the people that we see and seem to be the most confident are some of the least confident people around, and they're covering something up. I mean, that's very basic amateur psychology, and it's definitely not always true, but there is a truth to it. There is definitely a truth to it. And there's also a truth often to the quieter people in meetings and the quieter people in the rooms. Not always, but sometimes are actually the people who do have a lot of confidence in themselves, and they're just listening and they're absorbing, taking things in so that they can do a better job. And they're just understanding the nuggets that they think are useful and throwing away the ones that aren't.
Yeah. Or else they're a reflector. And I used to love tapping into those reflectors, because often they'd be really quiet in the meetings, but there are ways of getting them to open up in meetings. And I think we need to do more of that, make sure we're being fully inclusive in the meetings. And even if it means putting somebody on the spotlight, it's, what's your thoughts? How do you think that will work? You're asking their opinion, and that means you value them.
Yeah, I agree with that. We do workshops, branding workshops with our clients, and we bring in leadership teams, and there are always that mixture, as you have with any leadership team, that mixture of the more outgoing, outspoken people and the quieter people. And so we have certain methodologies too, where we make sure that the quieter people are heard. And so some of the workshop exercises that we do are silent, completely silent, and we get people writing down their ideas, so that way we make sure we have everybody's idea on board before we ever talk about the subject matter. And that really helps, because then the people who have written something down, and then we pick up each of their ideas and we specifically ask them about it, it gives them a chance to be heard, when sometimes they're not heard because, as you say, they're reflective. And
that's one of the things I love about silent brainstorming, when you get a group together and you say, right, we're going to do this in silence, because sometimes people, when you're brainstorming, will influence others. And I think that to capture those first thoughts on post-it notes, to come out and then discuss them in a silence initially, helps people feel like they can say what they want.
That's it. Yes, I completely agree. Something which we love doing, and I think it really, really does help. So these skills that you've gained over time throughout your career, etc. But your first story at the very beginning of the podcast shows us that actually you were learning these skills from a very, very young age, almost out of the womb into the shop.
Yeah, exactly.
And so tell us a little bit more about that. Tell us kind of how did you feel like, because it must have been a slightly different lifestyle to those around you, because you were working and going to school, etc. And so how did that feel to you? Did you notice that you were different, I guess, than most other kids?
No, not really. But it ignited a workaholic attitude in me, which I've always struggled with all my life, I have to say, because whatever I've done, I've always loved what I've done. I've been very, very lucky, and always been able to see the good parts of it. And that's not to say there haven't been bad parts, because some of my roles when I was in the office and things like that could be very stressful at times, but there were always good elements out of it. And I think it's around the people bit. And I think that was why that role in the shop sort of ignited my passion for people, really, because we were always interacting with people, and it did give me the confidence. But amazingly, I did lose a part of that confidence for a while. And that was, to be quite honest, when my first marriage. So, and as a result of losing that confidence and realising that sometimes you can have it knocked out of you, it's made me that little bit more compassionate to people when they're in that situation. And then I went through that, and that's another story. I'd got remarried, and I didn't want my first husband to know. And sometimes he would ring my work to find out about my picking the children up or whatever. And I could always remember him phoning, and a friend answered next to me, and they all knew that they had to say my old name. And he said, "Can you do?" And they slipped up on this one occasion, and he found out.
So I don't know how much you want to talk about that whole scenario, because I know it's a very personal thing to talk about. But so I won't ask too many questions around it. But it's clear from what you were saying that it wasn't a great marriage. The first marriage, it wasn't.
We were not suited. I think
Okay.
we were, in my opinion, we were both at fault. We were both quite fiery in our younger days, and I think that clashed, in fairness. So and we went through some traumatic times with him losing jobs and things, so it was stressful at times, but I got my daughters out of it. I learned an awful lot about myself in that period, so some good came out of it. And then I met my husband that I'm now with, and he's the best thing that's ever happened. And he took my daughters on and absolutely brought them up as his own. And he was a fantastic father and husband.
Okay, that's wonderful. And yeah, like I say, I won't ask too many more questions about that. But what you learned, among a billion other things, as you say, is that gave you an extra opportunity for empathy for other people who have been in that position, and also for other people who have had not confidence, even if not through going through what you've been through, but just from having not confidence for some other reason. And so that helped you to then, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And do you feel like you're back to the levels of confidence with people and chatting with people, etc., that you had before? Or are you somewhere in between, or even further ahead?
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere in between, really. So I have the confidence. I'm probably a little bit more quieter than I used to be most of the time, and I think that comes with age. Your experiences kind of affect you, and I couldn't tell you why. Probably somebody who's really good on the mind would, but yeah, no, so, I do. I mean, I've still got the confidence and everything, but I just come at it from a slightly different angle now.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And as you say, I think as we get older, sometimes we realise the difference between being confident, probably unjustly, and being confident at the times when it's actually we do know what we're doing, and this is our time to shine and to show off what we can do. So not being confident necessarily in everything, because we realise there are some things we just don't know, but being confident in the things that we are good at.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as well, you can easily have your confidence squashed out as that depicts, but also a few years ago I had a manager who micromanaged, didn't realise they micromanaged, and absolutely that destroyed my confidence. And if I hadn't done some work with a person afterwards, I think that, you know, I probably wouldn't have got my confidence back well enough. But having gone through that experience as well and seeing what micromanaging can do to people, it's really opened my eyes, and it was intense stress as well. Interestingly, the manager did open up and ask if I perceived that he did micromanage, and I did tell him straight yes.
How did he react to that when you said that?
But I kind of linked it to the fact that he'd gone up, he'd got promoted, and I said I thought he was working in the way of the old grade and not the new grade, and he took that point on board and went away to think about it.
Okay. Well, that's good. I mean, at least he was open to learning. As you say, I think that probably leads back to what we were talking about earlier with accidental managers too. And sometimes a big part of the problem is that when you don't know how to manage well, you decide to manage absolutely everything. And that then stresses you out, and it causes other problems because nobody can manage everything. It's impossible to do. Yeah.
And I think if you look at your strengths as well, so if you're very organised, etc., and then you get an immense amount of pressure, I do it myself. I go into micromanaging, and so I used to say to my team, I know my strength has gone into overdrive. Just tell me when I'm doing it, please. I've recognised this time I'm doing it. Can you just remind me if you think you're seeing it? And it was usually when we were under extreme pressure.
That's really interesting. I think it's... Often we talk about things like, you know, unconscious bias, and we talk about things like micromanagement, etc. And I think one of the key problems that is linked to every single one of these is that communication. If you're able to communicate to people that you know what your weaknesses are, you know that sometimes in this stressful situation, you might go into this road, and you are able to communicate that and say, look, I don't mean to do it. So please let me know if I am. Please help me out. Suddenly you've got a whole different atmosphere. And then obviously they all have their own traits as well and their things and their ways of reacting. So it's not going to be perfect, but that communication and that openness is often one of the biggest ways that we're able to fix things, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, brilliant. So as somebody who is able to help people in all of these situations that we talked about today, they're not going to be able to find you and to get that help from you unless they know where you are. So how can our listeners find you if they would like your support? Okay, so I'm just working on my website. I've been having great fun. I've learned something new about myself as well because I like being quite creative. So some initial work was done on it and I'm playing with it even more. Great. I didn't know I could be that creative, actually. Mind you, somebody else might look at it and say, well, that website's rubbish, but hey. Oh, don't worry about other people. Yeah, exactly. I've had fun. That's the main thing. So it's www.thepeoplementor.co.uk. You'll find me on there. You'll find lots of blogs, podcasts. My podcasts, and I'll announce it on here, that I do are going to stop for a while, and then we're going to revamp them with some new ideas that I've got. So, but you can find lots of helpful tips. Superb. We will, of course, put all of that onto the show notes. Thank you. For now, we will say anybody who needs Nicola, please go and find the People Mentor because she is wonderful, as you have all heard today. Thank you. And we will, of course, finish, as we always do, with a story from Puck Creations. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you so much.
Nobody knows what it'll be tomorrow. Tomorrow may never come. Come tomorrow, on today we may dwell. Dwell on the past for a future in hell. Hell is the torment that may come in time. Time is a concept to which we are blind. Blind to a future we cannot see. See, we must, the dreams that set us free. Free as your mind, when your tomorrow's not bound. Bound to dream. We're bound to dream. Dream of what's ahead. Let your dreams inspire. Inspire your present with your future's desire.
You've just been listening to the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We'll be back very soon, so make sure you subscribe and catch up on any of the episodes you've missed.